Welcome to Geotab Online Training. Today's session is MyGeotab Software, Getting Up and Running, Part 1.
Hi everybody, how are you doing today? This is Carrie Carter from Geotab. I have with me Jordan Guter from Technical Support, and he is going to guide us through our Getting Up and Running, Part 1. We have a full session here. Just want to let you know you do have the option of putting your questions into the bottom right-hand corner. We will certainly, as time permits, answer those questions. Some of them will be offline, but we'll certainly try to get them answered. If you have something that isn't answered, please reach out to your reseller or your account manager, and we can get you started. Okay, so let's just do an audio and visual check. If someone could please respond in the bottom corner there and let me know that everything's okay. Yes, okay, perfect. All right, and a little bit of troubleshooting. If you do have a problem with your line, if it's fuzzy or crackling or breaking up, you can hang up and dial back in. Sometimes that corrects just a bad line problem. Okay, so if that's everything, I'm going to hand it over to Jordan, and he's going to walk us through getting up and running.
All right, hello everybody. Hopefully everybody's ready to learn a bit more about our software. This will be a very simple getting up and running session. This will be the first of two parts. We're basically just helping anybody who doesn't know how to use the software to basically be able to get into it and know how to start using it. This will be very high level. We won't be getting into detail with any of the subjects, but enough that anybody can jump in and use it without problems. All right, so without further ado, I will jump in. So, starting off, the most basic of the basic in this case is getting going with logging in. So, in order to log in, it's just a matter of going to the my.geotab.com website. Okay. So, for many of you, it's just a matter of typing in my.geotab.com. But I do have to stress that if for some reason it's not working for you and you're not able to connect, just make sure that you're on the secure network. Some companies won't allow you to type in anything without the HTTPS in there. And if you try to type it without that S in there, your own company might just stop you from connecting to it. So you might have to add the HTTPS:// then my.geotab.com. Once you're at this page, you'll be entered with a simple username and password. All you have to do here is type in your username and your password to log in. And you do so just like this. So when you want to log out of this, it's just a matter of clicking your name and logging out, and you're no longer in there again. So in this particular example, I'm just going to be going on to one of our demo databases to showcase our information for you, and I will get started. All right, so once you log in, you are ready to go. All right, so once you log in, you're brought up to the startup screen. The first section I recommend everybody go to is your own personal options. This is where you can set up your own settings and details that you might want. So at the top right of the screen, it's just a matter of clicking your name and then clicking the Options tab. So I can just see that there's a little bit of a lag delay here, so I'm going to continue along with this. Once on this page, it's just a matter of setting up your settings. The first setting is the measurement system, just making sure you have it set up for yourself. We have two systems, the metric system and the US system. You know, the majority of everybody outside the US will be utilizing the metric system, but those of you in the US will be utilizing the US system, naturally. So you can set your details up here. Everything I'm going through right now on the options page is just to get you started and going. I'm not going to go into detail with all the options. Your date format is set, change how you'd like to see your times when you see the times, your time zone, and then finally the language that you'd like to have. I'm not sure how many joiners here in this call use other languages, but we do support 4 different languages at this current time. English, French, and Spanish, pretty common in North America, and for any of you guys being daring enough to try and learn a new language here, you can go ahead and try to use the Japanese. As I mentioned, there are other options down here afterwards, which I will come back to once we hit the relevant aspects of them in the software. All right, so going back to the Getting Started page, if you notice when I click the Getting Started, we actually started here when I first entered the database, but the Geotab guide. So it's great that I'm covering a lot of options in here, But the product guide is basically a guide that we've created that will cover almost everything I'm covering here and some other options with a little bit more detail. So this is a great place to start for anybody who absolutely wants to learn everything to do with the software. So if you just scroll down and you notice that there's different options in here, everything is covered that you would need to know within the software, but it's not in great detail either. It's also very high level. And it goes from how to install the device, how to verify the fact you've installed it, how to start adding a vehicle, feedback for vehicles, etc. So this is a great manual to use to look into. All right, so I was scrolling around before and just showing you as you go down that there are the different options and settings you can select in here, and just going through the system, the product guide to see what you might need to do. Now, once you're in the database for the first time, after it's been registered and you've created it, which you can ask your dealer or reseller to help you out with the first creation. Once that's done, nothing has been set up in the database for you. We don't have any users in here. We don't have any vehicles set up. I started you off with showing you how to just set up your own options. But from there, obviously, the biggest question is, what do I do next? So the most important thing, in my opinion, to do next would be to get the user options, user settings going, and everything to do with users. So it's great that you're able to get in here, but what about other people? So I will show you an example of a lot of people in this database. It won't necessarily be your own, but you can come into here right now and you can go ahead and add your own users or edit the ones you have in there. So the first step is when you get to this page, just to go ahead and add a user. So once you do so, you can see that it's given an email address, first name, last name, password, etc. As a small example for myself, if I want to make myself a user, I just wanted to point out that if you don't use an email address, you still can create the user, but you will be notified that it's recommended that you use an email address because a lot of our functions utilize emails. So you're able to go ahead and make a user without that. But again, as I pointed out, this message will just pop up letting you know that some of the options won't work. So if I were to go ahead and use an actual email, I won't be given that message error. So you have to make sure to populate something in the first name, last name section. Doesn't have to be real names, but you have to put something in there. And then you have to put in a password. Afterwards, I will show you how to set up settings in the database so you can create your own password policies. But for simplicity's sake right now, it has to at least be 6 characters and can't be anything too common in that it can't be 11111. It can't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So try to make it something a little bit more secure. So in this particular case, I'll just put in a password. It will tell me how strong the password strength is based off of how many capital letters I have in there, numeric values, or special symbols. I can instead, if I want to, when I create this user, force them to change the password in the first login, and it won't actually give me the option of creating a password because it'll send that user an email. Again, this will only work if you set up an email as the username, and allow them to log in and create their own password. We will have security clearance options here, which I'll cover afterwards, but you can set up what they're able to see within the database and what they're able to do. The data scope you set up, which is groups, again, something we'll cover afterwards, but this is basically how you can separate users and vehicles and zones and everything we have in the database into their own sections. All right, so that's just how you go about creating users simply. If I go ahead and I click Save, that user will be added after just a small loading screen, which goes through, and we pop back here. So now, if I go ahead to the search bar at the top, I can now find that user that I just added. If I click on it, I can still change any of the options I put in there, being their email address, name, as such. Also, I can go ahead and reset their password. This is for an administrator to go in here and reset the password, not with their old one, but just to create a brand new password if somebody lost it. I need to point out that on our end, due to security concerns, we don't store your passwords in a place where we can see it. Everything is encoded, and we aren't able to decode those passwords. So if you lost your password, the best bet is to get somebody to have with administration access to the database to go in there and create a brand new password. We cannot get that old password back for you. All right. So as I pointed out, we can set up clearances. There's going to be a lot of clearance options within this database, and I won't get into everything too in detail until we pass those sections. But you can go ahead and look at an example of administrator and what they have access to in here. Obviously, the administrator has access to everything. So if you wanted to create a user that didn't have access to everything, you can look at the other options in there, being default user or supervisor or view only. Also, there's nothing. You can go ahead and see what they have access to in here as well. And as you can see, there's a lot of options that this user doesn't have, and that's because I clicked the view only, so there's nothing that they can do in the database that would actually allow them to change the data. They can only see the data. All right. So one last thing is, if you wanted to change these values, you can't do it to the default ones that are in the database to begin with, but you can actually add your own subclearance, and then from in here, you can give it, your own name for it, and you can go ahead and select any option that you'd like and turn on and off what people are allowed to see or what they're allowed to do. And that brings me back to when I'm both creating a user or editing a user, I can set that clearance within the user edit option. Now, you've gone to the database, you've gone and you've created 10 different users, and you realize that they were all a different time zone than yours. Because when you create a user, that user is going to share the time zone that you have selected from what we showed at the beginning, also the measurement system. But you realize that you actually want them to have a different one. You're based out of East Coast, but they're West Coast. And it can be a little bit tedious to go in and change each individual user by clicking on their name. And I'll use the one I created as an example. And then go into the Options tab, which is the exact same as your own that we showed at the beginning, at the top right with the options, and changing them. Obviously, it's tedious to go into them individually. All right. So instead, if you would like to change multiple people at the same time, it's just a matter of clicking this check mark box and selecting individual users that you might want to change. So when I do so, I can just click on various users. I'm just selecting random ones here. So let's say I need to change these for any sorts of reasons. At the top, I'm given an option of edit users. Now, I'm actually brought to a brand new screen that might look a little bit daunting at first, but it's actually pretty easy. If I click on the Options tab, that will allow us to change the options that I was just talking about. So in this particular case, I mentioned maybe that these people are on the West Coast. I can go to America and find Los Angeles. And I would be able to save these settings and change everybody to that time zone. And obviously, anything that's left as do not change remains as such. There are other options here, but again, these are the options that I mentioned I'm not going to cover until a little bit later. So as I go forward and explain those, I will come back and explain how these work. So that pretty much covers how users are worked within the system. It's pretty easy, as you can tell, to come in here and add users as you see fit and editing them if you need to. So we'll move on to obviously the most important part other than users, which I'm assuming you could all agree are the vehicles. So the vehicle list, when you first enter here, it'll be completely empty. You'll have zero vehicles with no information in here or anything. So the first step is to go ahead and add your own vehicles. It's just a matter of, just like the users, is clicking that add button in the drop down and being able to add vehicle. So I'm going to show you first how you can just go ahead and add one vehicle. And that's just a matter of coming in here and putting in the serial number on the device that you've been provided. So that would be a G6 or G5 number with other characters afterwards, a 12-digit number. Once that's done, you type that in. You can name the vehicle what you want. Let's just say this is a pizza delivery company. I can call this Pizza Truck 1. And I can go ahead with that. Now I'm going to show you, I went ahead and actually put an incorrect serial number, and it's just letting me know that that's not a valid serial number, so it says that the length must be 12. So I can go ahead and try to add some characters to here. And I apparently don't know how to count. So I put one too many. Once I do that, I might actually get this other value that says it's invalid. This is because somebody probably typed in the serial number incorrectly. That's very important to note because if it was put in incorrectly, it will actually say this is an invalid number. It's actually a good thing because it prevents you from being able to enter a number that isn't a possible existing serial number in our system. As you can see, that keeps happening. So I'm just going to show an example of how you can go ahead and add one that does exist. And I will just pull another number. Now, this shouldn't happen to you with the first vehicle you add, but this is another example of an error you can get when you're trying to add the vehicle. And it's one that already exists in the system. So once that happens, you get an error that pops up basically saying the serial number already exists. Those are the three different errors you will run into when trying to add a vehicle. Now, since I don't personally have an extra serial number with me right now, I won't add one here. I'll actually go back to another one that I added earlier today. But all you have to note is that once you click OK, it will bring you back to this vehicle screen. And then the page that it will show you, if you want to see the information on it, is this page. So after you make the vehicle, it'll bring you to the device edit page, the exact same as though you go into the vehicle list and click on a vehicle to go to the edit page. One more thing to go over with adding vehicles is, let's say you have 100 vehicles. Again, being tedious can be a really annoying thing. Being too repetitive in the system can also be annoying. So we can actually do a quick import where we can add multiple vehicles at a time and not have to do them individually. So just like before, I can add a serial number and then the name of the truck or the vehicle that I want to add and import them. So as you can see here, an example is given where you're given the serial number. It can be with the dashes or without, and then either a space or a comma. I will just stick with the example that it gave me and just put a space in between. And once that's done, it will create two trucks in here, two pizza trucks with these serial numbers in them. All right. So once that's done, you'll have a list, somewhat probably more similar to what you see here, where we have a whole bunch of vehicles in here in the system. So one thing I do want to point out, though, for new users, it's very important to name the vehicle something that reminds you of what the vehicle itself is. And what I mean by the vehicle is I mean the physical vehicle, not the device that you plugged in for us. So don't, preferably if you're plugging in this G7 device, don't call it G77820CD1A8S. Same as with this G6 number. Try not to put that into the description because then you won't know what vehicle it is we're talking about. I highly recommend naming it either the name of the vehicle, maybe the make, model, year, the person who drives it regularly, or even some companies will have vehicle codes for their vehicles, and I recommend naming it for those. So in this particular case, this is my vehicle that I use for testing Garmin in, and that's why I have the name like that. So I always know when I look at the vehicle itself, I know the physical vehicle it's tied to. So this is just important to note because there are options that we can cover later that will show why it's important to note the descriptions.
Okay, there's one comment that we can make on descriptions. You could put VIN numbers in if that helps you. There are lots of people that do that. That can work. Often we have named vehicles. It might be by make or model or even license plate if that works. Whatever works for you is what's important. We do have a question here that I think needs to be brought up. If you're doing a quick import and you mistype a single entry, will it still post the rest of the correct serial numbers, or will it?
It will error out on you up to the point where it hits that number or that error, and it won't pass afterwards. Here's just a small example where there's multiple errors. As you can see, it keeps going down until it finds one. The first one here actually did hit an error, but nothing gets done. So this is, it tells you what was complete and what wasn't based off of those errors. So the easiest answer to answer that question is once you run it, it'll tell you what did and what did not succeed. All right, so just going back to my example of editing the vehicle, there's some options that might be necessary to look at right away, and that might be tweaking your attention when looking at this. So now that you have your serial number applied and your description, you have to make sure the device is plugged in. If the device is plugged in and communicating, it shouldn't take long for some of this information to actually update automatically. The VIN, for example, the vehicle ID number, is an ID that's generally kept on the ECM of the vehicle. Newer vehicles will always have this in their computer. Some of the older ones, when we're talking about 2000 or earlier, might not. So it's just important to note that if this does not auto-populate for you, it's possible you have an older vehicle that won't do so. You can go ahead and type in a VIN for yourself if you'd like. If the ECM does pick up the VIN number, it will replace what you put in there. The license plate obviously can't grab it on its own. You can add it if you'd like. And much like the VIN, the odometer and the current engine hours will also pull right from the ECM. And it's possible they might not because it's an older vehicle. I highly recommend wait for the data to pull from the vehicle to see if it auto-completes or auto-fills the odometer and engine hours. Because if you go ahead and add it might end up doubling up the odometer values based off of the fact that you entered your own. So in this particular example, 170,000 kilometers have been put in this vehicle. If I type 170,000 and then saved it, and then the data came in, I would get the current odometer from the actual ECM plus the 170,000 that I entered myself. All right. As you can see, when I try to type something, it will let me know what's going on, basically, as I pointed out to you. And it should be the same with the engine hours, although the error won't come up, but it works the exact same as the odometer in this case. You can add any comments you want to the vehicle. It could be useful to say, this used to be this, or this is a spare truck, or any other information you might want to know. Tires replaced on this day. It's just various information you might want to add for yourself to remember what may have happened with this vehicle. Oh, so sorry, I was just with somebody in the room. Terry just pointed out that I should point out that there's a question mark option. If you click this question mark, pretty much almost anywhere in the database, but specifically here, it's very useful. It will actually give you a brief description of each section that you're going through to add your own, or to know what these details do or what these options mean. So it can be very useful for seeing, if you forget or you don't remember this lesson or you can't find it in the product guide for whatever reason, you can click on that button and it'll give you a brief description of what they mean. So for now, this is just, as I said, pointing out early how to log in and get things going. So for now, if you're just getting your system going, don't worry about the more details right now. Don't worry about driver feedback in the groups. When we cover those, we'll come back to it and explain them in greater detail. All right, so now you're in the system. You have your vehicles in there. Again, much like the users, you want to make some changes across the board. Just like before, I can go ahead and select individual vehicles that I might want to edit. And I can go ahead and make the same changes that I've made with when I first create the vehicle itself. If you want to find a vehicle, as you notice here, I have a list of only 4, and that's because I typed everything that has a JG in it. You can find specific vehicles just by typing it into the text box. You don't have to click enter. Just as you type, they'll pop in if they exist, and if there's a combination that you're searching for that doesn't exist, it won't show up. Furthermore, if you want to edit everything to say that had this JG space G in it, instead of selecting everything individually, I can actually just say select all the visible vehicles I can see on the screen. At any point in time, if I'd like, I can click on show everything that's visible, and I can edit everything that I can currently see on this screen at this time. So you have your vehicles in there, you know how to edit them, you have your users to log in and use the system. What do I do with it? Well, for most of you, what you get the software for is actually being able to see where the vehicles are live through their GPS. And I can do so. Once I click on the map, this is the live map, I can now, again, search for that value that I was talking about before. You don't have to click enter again, it just pops up. I can search for the vehicle I was just talking about. And here we can see that it's currently parked at a location that arrived today about an hour ago. Perfect. So you can see that this vehicle is parked at this location and this is where it's at. But if I wanted to maybe see more vehicles, I can go ahead and add those to the list as well. And as you can see now, I'll see all these vehicles on the map. If you notice, the map zoomed out such that I can see all the vehicles that are visible that I have selected. That's very important to point out because you won't lose where a vehicle is, you won't get lost. You can go ahead and find it just by clicking on it. Even if I select a vehicle that's not part of this area, all of these are, here we have one that just popped out, it will still zoom out the map so you can see everything. So now I have these lists of vehicles. If I want to just see one specifically, instead of having to zoom in manually to that location, I can just click on it and see. As you can see, this is our office, where obviously a lot of our vehicles will be, but this is where we are. So what do we do with this information now? How can I maybe use it more efficiently? It's not just a matter of seeing where the vehicles are right now live on the map, but how can I use this live map for this data? So an important aspect to point out is that you can sort the vehicles that I have selected on the side by their names, alphabetically, etc., or by their status. And the status can be important because this is where you can currently see what vehicles might be driving, what vehicles might be stopped at a location, or vehicles that just aren't working in general, and they will be grayed out. So I'll go ahead and actually select all of our vehicles, and it could take some time. So as you saw, it just took a little bit of time there for me to select the vehicles. The more vehicles you have, the longer it could take. But now that they've all appeared here on the map, now it's zooming out because we do have vehicles literally globally. So I will just click to sort of zoom in on the spot to see where things are. Again, if I click on the status, you can now see that I have vehicles that are currently driving. And I can see that they're currently driving at a location. If I wanted to see the vehicles that have been stopped for the longest, it's just a matter of clicking that again and seeing an order of vehicles that have been stopped, or how long they have been in order of least stopped to most stopped in this case. So you can sort of play around with the data you have. If you needed to see for dispatch reasons or to make sure people are supposed to be en route to somewhere or see if they're going where they're supposed to be going, you can go ahead and click the stats to make sure. In this case, I want to make sure that people who are supposed to be driving right now are driving. So I'm going to click on that list, and I can see, okay, enough of my fleet right now is driving. In this particular case, we're only looking at about 2% of the fleet, so I'm assuming that wouldn't be a good thing for you. But in this particular case for us, it's a good thing because we should all be working. Well, in the office, right? So you can go ahead and sort and look at things and click on them. Now, it's great. We can do this, but I might not like how some of this map looks, some of the options. So I can click on this button, just remove all the vehicles that I have selected. I'm just going to go back to my own example that I was looking at before, and it's currently stopped. And I'm going to add a second vehicle to that list. So I'm looking at these two vehicles. I was curious about something. I now realize I don't really care about this Geotab. So I'm going to go ahead in there and just deselect him. He's gone. Oh, I made a mistake. I wanted him back. I'll just click it again. So I have him back there, and now I have these three vehicles on the map. Now, for possible dispatch reasons or situations you might be in, you might want to actually find out who is closest to a specific location. So, let's just say I went to lunch today, and I ended up at, there's a Subway over here, and I clicked at the spot, and my vehicle broke down. I can't get back, and I just want to find out who's the closest to me at this point in time. I can actually click on that spot on the map and say nearest. And now it's going to go through the whole list of everybody and tell me who's nearest to this location. If I needed to go back to the list and only see my drivers, I'll just have to reselect them after that location selected. Quickly, I can see how some of you might be thinking that might not be sufficient, so maybe after this I'll try to fix that up. So the ones that I already have selected will just stay selected. But as you can see, I now have distance away from this location and a new sort that allows me to see the closest and furthest vehicles away from that spot. So it can be very useful for dispatch reasons, emergencies, or just needing to know who's close to a specific spot for any other sort of reason. If you needed somebody to go to the coffee store and pick up coffee. So there's another option to do this as well, and this is looking up a specific address. So much the same is I can click on an address location. As you can see, I'm typing it out, and you can see that there's now a new option that's appeared here that is in the vehicle. I need to stress that For this to work properly, be as specific as you can with the address location. I clicked this and I know it's worked before, but you might want to put in a zip code or a postal code or other sorts of information to make sure that it knows where it is. If I were to just type in a street name, it might not pick a street name near where you're interested in looking up. But again, much like clicking on the nearest, it will tell me all the vehicles and how far they are away from that location, and I can sort them by that distance. So I have some techniques and strategies I can use to sort of look at the map and use it. But now the map itself, I might not be too happy with the map I'm using or how I can look at it or certain information. So there's the map drop-down list, and I can go in here to just change some of my settings. So I can go ahead and change my map type. We will have a lot of examples here right now, and you're able to add some examples. That will be covered in a further session. But generally, you will see Google Maps and OpenStreetMaps. And once I click on a different type of map, it just takes some time to pop up and show the difference of it. And now I can use this map as an alternative to the one that I was using. That map will also determine where we pulled these address locations from, be it Google or Bing Maps. So it will pull the location of the address of the vehicle stopped at and pull that information. If it's not an address and it's within a zone, it will show that zone location instead. Again, zones we'll cover afterwards, but they're just geofences for a location. So you can see here it pulls. If at all, as a user, you see that they're ... it just means that they're in the process of pulling the location address. So it could just be taking some time because Google is a bit slow at giving us the address location. And lastly, just to sort of show one more thing on the view is, if I like specifically looking at this view here, I can click on the map and I can save this view. Sorry, view. I can save this view and say, demo. And now it'll save that view. So even if I leave it and I want to go back to it, I can just click on the Jordan demo and it goes back to that spot. So we're now going to go back in time a little bit, and I'm going to go back to the options that I showed you earlier. We can now finally notice or figure out what some of these map settings mean. So as you can see, I have my default map type, same options that I was there. So this will be the map type that I have set for my user whenever I go to the maps. If I prefer the OpenStreetMaps option, it will default to that map option whenever I log in there. If I prefer the Google Maps, just make sure it's set to that. The type of view that I'm using. Am I seeing the satellite view, a road map, etc.? You know, I can still always change it in live map, but you can change the default for yourself so that when you first log in, it's using a specific one. The zone display, this is basically just an option to see if you want to see all the zones or not. I recommend leave this as default because the zone itself will be set to be visible or not. And then last but not least, the view that I made, I can actually put it up to the top as the default that I'd like to see whenever I go to the map, so that it will go to this location, this view that I've selected when I go to the map. So when I go to the map, it will go to that location. Now there's one thing that I did that you probably shouldn't do yourselves after you make changes. As you notice, I went back. That Jordan demo isn't at the top. Please save your settings whenever you change your options. So I just want to show that. It's great. I went here. It wasn't quite at the location I was at because it was higher up. And that's because it wasn't going to the default view that I had selected now because I didn't save it. Okay, so we know how to see vehicles on the map now. We have our vehicles in there. We have users who are even able to go into the system and look at this information. But now how do I look at past trips? So I can click on the trips history. So the trips history is basically the place where I can see historic trips and a breadcrumb trail of what that vehicle has done. So I jump in here. I now have nothing showing on the screen, but that's because I have nothing selected. Again, I can select the vehicle that I was just talking about, and by default, it'll show me today's date and everything that that vehicle has done. So as you can see, I have that vehicle showing up here. Just like with the live map, just like everything else, if I deselect that vehicle, it'll just go away, and I can add any that I want. I can have multiple vehicles showing. I can take vehicles away. In this particular case, I'll use my vehicle that I used today just to drive to work. So you have the addresses here, and much like the live map, it'll say the location it stopped at the end of that trip. As I pointed out before, I went to Subway for lunch. I didn't actually get stranded there, thankfully, but As you can see here, we call that location the CIBC Subway, Jingtai Plaza location, and then the Pine Grove Road is the address. Everything after that is the address of that location, even if you have a zone that named it. So if I actually want to see the trip itself, I just click on it, and I can see the drive that occurred for that trip. So we will cover rules later, so you can ignore everything that's on the bottom here, which are customized rules that we've added to the system to tell us if a driver was doing something they shouldn't have done or something was broken. We'll cover that in a future session, but for now, we'll just look at the trip itself. So if I deselect the trip, it gets rid of it. If I click on a new trip, it'll show it, and here you go. We can see trips that were made. All right. So just clicking on it on the entire day, I can see. So again, what I was showing you that you couldn't see before is that when I click on the entire day, being that blue bar at the top, it will show me all the trips I made for that day, or just remove all the trips for that day. So you don't actually have to select each individual trip. If you notice at the top here, near where the date is, there's an arrow. If I click on that, I can look at yesterday. And it'll show me all the trips that I made yesterday as well. Now, in this particular case, it split up this vehicle because there was a separate person driving it as well. So it split it up into two. Again, future sessions, we'll cover that as well. I can go back another day, and I can see all the trips I made on that day. So if I go back a bit, I'll keep going back for some time. And I'm actually going to go back to a time when I didn't use the vehicle. And as you can see, there was no activity that day. And that's just what it will show me. Nothing happened that day. So if you notice that pops up and you're wondering why, it's probably because the vehicle wasn't used. So here's an example of a trip I brought up again. If I just click on the top, it'll show me the entire trip for that day. I can deselect trips once again and just look at them. Now, you're probably wondering, oh, that's great that I can see days and I can select back, but how do I look at maybe a custom date? So when you click that options bar, I can actually put in a custom date that I might want to look at, or stock times that we have selected here for yourself. So if I want to look at every trip that I made this week, it's just a matter of clicking this week, and for sure, clicking apply changes. If you don't click that, it's not going to do anything for you. So much like the save, just make sure you click apply changes. As you can see, it's now going to tell me the trips that I made throughout this week. It will tell me that this week goes to March 1st. That's just because that's what this week is. And, the software is good, but we can't see into the future, so I won't say anything up until March 1st after today. Sorry, I know it's the feature somebody was asking for. So moving along, if I wanted to see the multiple trips throughout that time, I'm not sure why many people would, but I can only show the trips for each at a time. I can see them all, but I can only select and show the trips per day by selecting. All right, so again, you can use this software as you'd like to see the old breadcrumb trails as you'd like, and see the historic data without any issue. Putting in your own custom dates if you want to see something. Let's say somebody called to complain that your driver wasn't doing something or was at a place that they shouldn't have been, and say it was on January 1st. I can go ahead and just type that into my custom date and apply the changes, and it'll just give me January 1st. And it'll pop up for me, and I can see that that day and the trips that it made. Well, let's say I knew that it happened within a period of time. I can click on that trip and just see where it was. Now, something I want to point out is we still have the old trip there on the map, despite the fact that I now selected a new day. So much like with on the live map, as I briefly showed you, because if I go to that map option and clear the map, it'll clear all my options. I don't have to go back, find them, just select them again. I can just clear them, and now I have a fresh map to look at a trip. So there, I have a small example of a trip, and I can look at it. And you might actually be wondering, I'm glad this example is used, where you might see a jump over a period of space that didn't make sense. So I was actually testing not allowing the GPS to work in this time. So in between these two logs, the GPS was blocked. And then it got, if you see any straight lines that go through locations where it doesn't seem like it should be, that's because the GPS probably wasn't working at that period of time. And that's how I was able to get to this, well, this is actually a plaza. So it makes sense that it went through here, but these ones, as you can see, shouldn't have cut like this. All right. So we have this information, and I might want to read more into it. So aside from looking at the map, when I select on a day to look at trips, I have bits of information for each trip individually here. So every time I show a trip, it will actually show the last trip of the day before. That's so I know where I was parked overnight, so that's not just going to show me where I've been today without showing that initial location. So as you can see, the first trip that's in this option here is actually from yesterday, from the date before, but it's just still showing that so you know where that person had come from, and letting you know from a visual point of, a non-visual point of view where they were. It's great if I click on this trip, I can see where I came from, but if I'm not looking at the map, it's important to know maybe where that vehicle came from. So I have these trips here, and I want to know some more information about them. I can see how long they were stopped at these locations. So at our office, I was stopped for this 3-hour period of time, and that is because I went for lunch after arriving at work. It tells me how much time I spent idling, how much time it took me to drive to this location, and then how far it took me, how far of a distance I traveled to get there. Now, I know many of our callers here do use the U.S. measurement system, and I apologize if we're looking at kilometers right now. As I pointed out before, we can easily change these options to the U.S. and save it. And fully, I recommend maybe refreshing your screen instead of having to log out back in for that change to take place. So now when I go back to this, we've now been changed to miles. So maybe a lot of you are more content with seeing miles here, and you can get a good idea as to how long it takes for me to get to work. I know there's a lot of jealous people out there right now. All right. And we have this from and to time. This is actually not how long it took for the vehicle to travel, but how long it was stopped at this location. So I started work at 9, I got there at 9 o'clock, and I left there for lunch at 12:22. That's how long this vehicle was at Geotab 1081. That's the 8:59, 12:22. Now, some of you might be wondering, oh, that's great that you showed me that, but when did I leave the location? How long was the trip? Well, we know the trip took about 19 minutes and 6 seconds. And if you look at the trip before, you can see the time that I left that location and the time that I arrived here. As you can see, the 8:40 to 8:59 accounts for this 19 minutes of driving. So one thing you might notice here is that I have a trip that's currently showing the time now, and that is because my vehicle is currently parked there and it's showing me what it's doing at this point in time. Obviously, it's still parked there, so this will keep incrementing as I look at today's data. If I refresh the screen, it should show me 219 now instead of the 218 that you saw. Right. So I'm just going to point out again once more that if anybody has any questions, still a great opportunity to ask them. We have another member from our support team answering these questions for us while I'm doing this live. All right, so one last thing I want to point out is at the top of this blue bar, it will actually give you the total amount of time that these instances occurred. So this vehicle was stopped total for today for 3 hours and 48 minutes, which is the cumulative value of today's stop times. Today's idle times for its idle, and today's driving times for its driving. Now, the idle time, some of you might be a little bit curious as to how it works. Our system creates an idle time assuming that any time spent at a stop sign or a red light or just starting up your engine in the morning aren't included in the idle times. This idle time is ultimately only the time a vehicle stops at its final location and the time it takes for them to turn off that ignition. So in this particular example, it's 3 seconds. It took me personally 3 seconds after I parked the office to turn off my engine. If that idle time hits 200 seconds, it will hit 200 plus idle time. You'll see it there, and it will actually create a brand new trip. So if I park somewhere and I leave my car on for 400 seconds, the idle time will be 400 seconds, and that will be the end of that trip. And the second I start to drive away, a new trip will be created. So maybe this is just too much data for you, for some of you new users. You just want to know basic information about the drivers and how much information, or how much they've driven or how far they've driven. You can see that there's a summary tab here. This that I've shown you here would be considered the detailed report, the trips history. This would be the summary report. As you can see, I still selected the one vehicle I had, and now it's just giving me a cumulative piece of information for today's trips. I didn't just want to see each individual vehicle, but I want to see how the whole company is driving and how much time is spent. I can look at this information here as well. The whole company today drove 1,500 miles. They cumulatively drove 3 days and 10 hours worth and idle for this much time. The smaller that purple bar is, the better. We don't want people idling and wasting gas. So again, great opportunity to ask questions. I don't think we'll have enough time to follow up with the group section of this, this presentation. I will just briefly show how our groups will look, but I'll get into more detail in the part 2 of this session. And as you can see, we have a groups tree here, not to be mistaken with a hierarchical tree, because I don't want people thinking that it's necessarily a hierarchy that we're following. It's just how we represent our groups. And as you can see, we try to separate the groups into different sections, be it location sections, departments of a company, the types of vehicles there are, or even reporting groups or testing that we're doing. As you can see, when I click on that department group, it splits up into the different departments of our company. And you can further drop down that option to other things. So apparently somebody in our company has a limo to themselves. All right. So I think I'm going to stop the general training here, but we do have a bit of time to open it up for questions. So again, I apologize for those technical difficulties earlier. Hopefully it didn't cut into the session too much for you. But now it's an open forum for any questions that we might take up.
Please don't hesitate to put your questions in. We will certainly answer them if we can. We are here for a few minutes, and we will respond accordingly.
Okay, so somebody asked a question about how a trip is defined, and that is actually a pretty good question because I did explain one situation a trip is defined, but not every situation. So the basic way that a trip is defined is the moment that the ignition of an engine is turned, of a vehicle is turned on, and then when it's turned off. So even if I were sitting at a spot and I turned on my ignition and I turned it off after 2 seconds, that would be considered a trip unto itself. So that's the most basic condition for a trip. But as I pointed out before, if a vehicle parks and idles for about 200 seconds, that will also indicate the end of a trip. So those are the 2 conditions that will cause that to happen. Okay, so one good question that was brought up is Google or Bing. Maybe how do we select them, or how do we know which one we're using? So in simple terms, we are actually only able to show one of those types of maps. We can either show Google or Bing on a database at a time. So in order to change it yourself, when you're into this database, this is actually something you can start with as well, is you go to the administration option, you click on the system, and you go to your system settings. Once here, there's a Maps tab. When you click on this Maps tab, you can actually select Google Maps or Microsoft Bing. I know we have these other options here, but for you, I would recommend choosing either the Google Maps or Microsoft Bing, as these other options are always going to be available for you, regardless of which one you have selected. But due to certain concerns and utilizing competitor maps, we can't have both as an option. So you have to select either Microsoft Bing or Google Maps. Once that's selected and saved, when I go to the map, when you go to that map type, you will see that Google Maps spot is replaced by Bing, or vice versa if I switch the map that I'm using. This is actually an interesting page that I was going to break up another time, but it might be worthwhile going into really quick when you first log in, just to put in your company name information. Don't worry too much about the custom code spot. It doesn't mean anything for the customer at this point. This is for our own internal testing. All right, so I'm just going to ask in the open if there are any other good questions that we might want to answer. Okay, so there's a question here that why are there missing GPS locations at turns? Has the logging algorithm changed, or is it a reception issue? So this sounds like it's a question from somebody who's been using the software and might have noticed that there might be some turns that are missed. If you're using the example that I showed, though, I was personally doing tests at that point in time to try and trigger a GPS being lost. The algorithm in general for our turns hasn't changed. Now, again, since this is a high-level explanation, I'll just sort of say our software device is based around an algorithm to determine when it should pick up GPS locations, and turns it should pick up more to properly pick up that turn. So our algorithm hasn't changed, and if you're noticing your own devices doing this a bit more commonly than normal, it might be worth just bringing up with us offline.
By and large, it wouldn't do that unless there's something jamming it. So as Jordan said, he did it just for testing it, but normally that would not happen. You can usually see it going right around the corner in a perfect line on the map.
Somebody's asking about the trip summary page and the graphs on the side. I'm not sure how detailed the question is. Basically asking, a color-coded pie chart appears on the right side. Can this be set up for what the chart displays? So this can only be set up to show what the chart displays in terms of the zone type locations you have. I will explain that in a future session, but as of right now, no, it's limited to those options that we have in here. There's no customization of that chart. But which we will cover again later once we get into dashboards, you can create your own custom pie charts to show up on the front screen. All right, so we are actually running out of time here. As you know, we do have a part 2. I'll let Perry jump in and explain that.
Okay, so here's our part 1 is complete. Hopefully that gave you a good overview. We will have these videos posted online on our knowledge base. I will send out the link next week to everyone that's attended. Please share it if you need to. That's what it's for. Part 2 of this will happen on March the 19th. Sorry for the delay, but there's a March break in between there. And we hope to all see you back then. Register as you know, and we'll see you then. Thanks for coming.